CEO lost everything and came for an interview, shocked to see his former wife celebrating their twins' birthday in the boss's chair. Hi, my most adored, deeply treasured and endlessly loved family. Welcome home to Mr. Peter Stories. You are not just numbers. You are not just views. You are my heartbeat. You are the reason this space feels like light in a dark world. Every second you spend with me is a gift I never take for granted. I carry your love in every breath. To my beautiful new family members, please don't rush away. Give this story a chance. Let your heart open to the magic that has touched so many before you. I know you'll feel it too. And to my precious loyal ones who've been here from the very beginning, you are the roots of this tree. Please speak in the comments. Tell the new ones what this family truly is. Safe, strong, and full of love. Don't wait for reminders. If you still feel connected, if this voice still brings warmth to your soul, like and comment. Let your presence shine. Let the world hear you say, loud and proud, I am here. Our next beautiful goal is 30,000 family members, not just in number, but in love, in loyalty, and in unshakable trust. We will reach there together, hand in hand. And now, my prayer for your heart, spoken with all the love I have. May every tear you've cried turn into strength. May peace gently cover your soul like a soft blanket. May love knock on your door again and again, and may you never feel alone, not for a single moment. This is not just a story. This is your home. This is your refuge. This is where love lives. If you feel it too, say it gently, say it proudly, I am here. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and dying dreams, where fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects against a ceiling that had witnessed too many final goodbyes. 13-year-old Carla Kokesh sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair that had become her second home over the past 3 months, watching her father's chest rise and fall with the mechanical assistance of machines that beeped in rhythm with her breaking heart. David Kokesh, once a mountain of a man whose laughter could fill their tiny apartment and whose bear hugs could chase away any nightmare, now lay diminished against white sheets that seemed to swallow his frame whole. His hands, those beautiful, weathered hands that had built countless homes for other families, while barely holding together their own, trembled as they reached for hers. 20 years of construction work had carved stories into his palms, calluses that spoke of early mornings and late nights, scars that whispered of accidents survived and deadlines met, fingers that had somehow always found a way to put food on their table, even when the bills outnumbered the dollars in his worn leather wallet. Baby girl, he rasped, his voice a shadow of the booming tenor that used to sing her lullabies about angels and stars. Blood specked his lips like crimson freckles, each drop a reminder that his body was betraying him just when she needed him most. Come closer, sweetheart. Daddy needs to tell you something important. Carla leaned forward, her small hand disappearing, completely within his grasp, feeling the paper-thin skin that stretched over bones that had grown too prominent, too sharp. His eyes, those warm brown eyes that had always looked at her like she hung the moon, struggled to focus, but when they found hers, they blazed with a fierce intensity that made her breath catch. Your mind, he whispered, each word a gift wrapped. In pain, your beautiful, brilliant mind is pure gold, baby girl, forged in fire and blessed by God himself. A coughing fit seized him, and she watched helplessly as he fought to continue, his determination stronger than his dying body. Promise me, he gasped when the spasm passed. Promise me you'll never let this world convince you otherwise. Outside, the window, Chicago's skyline, glittered with lights that belonged to people who would never know her name, who would never see past the worn clothes and second-hand shoes to the genius burning inside her 13-year-old soul. But her father saw it. He had always seen it from the time she was 5 years old and reading at a high school level to last year when she'd scored in the 99th percentile on every standardized test, despite attending a school where half the textbooks were held together with duct tape and hope. "You remember those nights on our front porch?" he continued, his voice growing stronger with the weight of memory, "when we used to count the stars together. You remember how you used to ask me if we could touch them if we climbed high enough?" A smile ghosted across his lips, transforming his gaunt features into an echo of the man who had raised her alone after her mother retreated into a darkness that doctors couldn't diagnose and prayers couldn't heal. Carla nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks like twin rivers of grief, remembering those precious summer evenings when the heat would finally break and they'd sit on their fire escape with glasses of sweet tea and dreams bigger than their circumstances. He'd tell her stories about constellations while she'd calculate the actual distance to each star, and somehow in those moments the cramped apartment behind them would feel like a palace, because it contained the love between a father and daughter, who understood that riches came in forms the world couldn't measure. "Promise me," he said again, his grip tightening with surprising strength, "promise me you'll rise so high that you'll touch those stars we used to count. Promise me you'll become everything I know you can be, even when the world tries to tell you that little black girls from the South Side don't get to dream big dreams." "I promise, Daddy," she whispered, the words torn from her throat like a vow carved in stone. "I promise I'll make you proud. I promise I'll show them all what you always knew was inside me." His smile was radiant then, transforming the hospital room into something holy, something sacred. "My beautiful genius daughter," he murmured, his thumb tracing across her knuckles one final time. "You're going to change the world, baby girl. I can see it shining inside you like the sun itself." The heart monitor's steady beeping began to falter, each tone growing further apart, like footsteps walking away down a long hallway. David Kokesh's eyes never left his daughter's face as his breathing grew shallow, then softer, then still. The machines screamed their electronic grief, but Carla heard only silence, the profound, devastating silence of a world without her father's voice in it. In that moment, something crystallized within 13-year-old Carla Kokesh. The promise she had made wasn't just words spoken to comfort a dying man. It was a sacred contract, written in love and sealed with determination that would burn inside her like an eternal flame. The next 5 years passed like a slow-motion disaster film, each frame more devastating than the last. The repo men came first, stripping their apartment bare like vultures picking clean a carcass, taking everything that wasn't nailed down and some things that were. Her mother, already a ghost haunting their home, retreated so completely into her own mind that Carla became both parent and child, caregiver and orphan, adult and adolescent, all at once. At 14, she was working part-time at a diner after school, her small frame struggling with heavy trays while her homework waited on the counter during brief breaks. At 15, she added weekend shifts at a grocery store, counting every penny toward the electric bill while maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA that no teacher celebrated because poverty made genius invisible to eyes that only saw designer clothes and full bellies. At 16, she was tutoring classmates for $5 an hour during lunch periods, watching kids who couldn't solve basic algebra problems drive home in cars that cost more than her family's annual income. At 17, she worked every summer at multiple jobs, morning shift at a diner, afternoon shift at a dry cleaner, while applying to colleges with essays written during breaks and scholarship applications filled out by the light of her cell phone when the electricity got cut off. Through it all, her father's voice echoed in her memory like a sacred hymn. "You're pure gold, baby girl. Rise so high you'll touch the stars. Some nights, when exhaustion threatened to claim her sanity and despair whispered that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford, Carla would stand on their fire escape and look up at the same stars her father had shown her. In those moments, with the weight of an impossible life pressing down on her 18-year-old shoulders, she would make the promise again, to him, to herself, to the universe that seemed determined to test every ounce of strength she possessed. "I will not just survive," she would whisper to the Chicago sky, her breath visible in the winter air, her voice carrying across rooftops and alleyways where other broken dreams lay scattered like fallen leaves. "I will rise. I will touch those stars. I will become everything you knew I could be, Daddy, even if it kills me trying." The wind would carry her words into the darkness, and somewhere in the space between heartbeats and hope, Carla Kokesh began to understand that she wasn't just making a promise to a dead man. She was forging her own destiny, one star at a time. The memories of those final days before her father's death played like a broken film reel in her mind. She remembered how he had struggled to sit up in that hospital bed, his breathing labored but his spirit unbroken, determined to share every piece of wisdom he could before time ran out. "Baby girl," he had said during one of their last conversations, when the morphine made his words slur but his love remained crystal clear, "the world is going to try to put you in a box. They're going to see your skin, your address, your circumstances, and they're going to assume that's all you'll ever be." His weathered fingers had traced the outline of her face with infinite tenderness, as if he were memorizing every feature, every freckle, every expression that made her uniquely his daughter. "But you listen to me now, Carla. You are not defined by where you come from. You are defined by where you're going. You are not limited by what you have. You are empowered by what you dream." Every great woman in history started as somebody's little girl with big dreams, and most of them faced obstacles that would have crushed weaker souls. She could still feel the weight of his hand on her shoulder, still hear the conviction in his voice when he spoke about her future as if it were already written in the stars they loved to count together. "Your great-grandmother was born into slavery, but she taught herself to read by candlelight. Your grandmother raised 6 children alone during the Depression and still managed to send your daddy to school. Your mama, before the sadness took her away from us, was the smartest woman I ever knew. She could solve any mathematical problem, fix any broken thing, make magic out of scraps and dreams." Those words had planted seeds in Carla's soul that bloomed into unshakable determination. During the darkest moments of her adolescence, when she was 16 and the electricity got shut off again, she would do her homework by streetlight streaming through their apartment window, her father's voice echoing in her memory. "You come from a long line of strong women who refused to surrender." When she was 17, and her guidance counselor suggested she be realistic about her college ambitions, recommending community college instead of the prestigious universities that had sent her recruitment letters, she would smile politely and nod while thinking about her father's words, "They're going to try to put you in a box." When classmates whispered about the girl who wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, who brought peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day, who worked nights and weekends while they enjoyed carefree teenage years, Carla would remember her father's promise, "You're going to change the world, baby girl." The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion or the financial stress, it was the isolation. At 18, standing on the precipice of adulthood, Carla existed in a world between worlds, too mature for her teenage peers who worried about prom dates and graduation parties, too young for the adult responsibilities that had been thrust upon her shoulders, like an inheritance she never wanted. She was fluent in the language of survival, but still learning the vocabulary of hope. Yet every night, when she finally collapsed into the narrow bed she shared with her increasingly distant mother, Carla would close her eyes and transport herself. Back to that hospital room where love had conquered death, where a dying man had passed the torch of possibility to his daughter's outstretched hands. In those precious moments before sleep claimed her exhausted mind, she could still feel her father's presence like a warm blanket around her shoulders, still hear his voice whispering the words that had become her battle cry. Rise so high you'll touch the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, another double shift, another rejection letter, another reminder that girls like her weren't supposed to dream beyond their zip codes. But tonight, she was still David Kokesh's daughter, still the brilliant child who had solved calculus problems at 12 and written poetry that made her teachers weep. Tonight, she was still pure gold, forged in fire and blessed by God himself. A promise lived in her bones now, pulsed through her bloodstream like liquid courage, transformed every setback into setup for something greater. She was 18 years old, orphaned and broke and beautiful in ways the world couldn't see yet, but she carried within her the dreams of generations, women who had survived slavery, depression, discrimination, and heartbreak to pass their strength. Forward like precious heirlooms, Karla Kokesh was ready to touch the stars. Chapter 2. The Devil in Designer Armor. When temptation wears a tuxedo, at 18 years old, Karla Kokesh moved through the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel like a shadow in borrowed silk. Her reflection was multiplied infinitely in crystal chandeliers that cost more than most. People's houses, each step across marble floors, quarried from Italian mountains and polished to mirror perfection, reminded her of the vast distance between her world and this one. The black cocktail dress she wore, borrowed from her supervisor at the catering company who took pity on girls who showed up to work galas in their only clean outfit, hugged her curves with an elegance that made wealthy patrons pause mid-conversation to follow her movement with hungry eyes that saw beauty but never bothered to look deeper. She carried champagne flutes on silver trays that weighed more than the groceries she could afford each week, weaving between clusters of Chicago's elite who discussed charitable donations with the same casual indifference they might reserve for ordering lunch. These were the people who lived in the penthouses she cleaned, who drove cars she detailed on weekends, who existed in a stratosphere so far above her reality that breathing their air felt like stealing something precious. More champagne, sir? She offered to a man wearing a watch that could pay her rent for 3 years, her voice carefully modulated to the perfect pitch of invisible service. Polite enough to avoid complaints, quiet enough to remain forgettable. He took the glass without looking at her face, his manicured fingers never making contact with hers, as if poverty might be contagious through casual touch. The Meridian's ballroom existed in a dimension where money had been transformed into art. Walls, draped in silk that shimmered like captured moonlight, tables set with china that belonged in museums, flower arrangements that cost more than her mother's monthly disability check. Every surface gleamed with the kind of perfection that required armies of invisible hands to maintain. People like Karla, who scrubbed and polished and arranged beauty for others to enjoy while remaining perpetually excluded from the paradise. They created. Tonight's event was the annual Future Leaders Gala, where Chicago's wealthiest families gathered to congratulate themselves on their philanthropy, while their children networked for positions in companies they would inherit rather than earn. Karla had worked enough of these events to recognize the patterns, the performative charity, the calculated networking, the way money moved in circles that excluded anyone who hadn't been born inside them. But when Anthony Vitale took the stage, something in the room's energy shifted like atmospheric pressure before a storm. At 26 years old, he commanded attention with the gravitational pull of inherited power and practiced charisma, his custom-tailored tuxedo fitting his 6-foot frame like liquid obsidian poured over marble. He was beautiful in the way that money could make men beautiful. perfect teeth, courtesy of elite orthodontists, skin that glowed with the health of someone who had never missed a meal, hair styled by professionals who charged more per hour than Carla made in a month. But it was his eyes that held the room captive, intelligent, intense, and completely confident in his right to stand above everyone else. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone who had never been told no, never been denied anything he desired, never questioned whether his words deserved to be heard. "Tonight we gather not just as Chicago's most successful families, but as stewards of a community that depends on our vision, our leadership, our willingness to invest in tomorrow's potential." Carla paused near the kitchen doors, her tray forgotten. As she watched him speak, there was something magnetic about his presence, the way he seemed to believe every word that poured from his lips like honey mixed with promises. He spoke about community investment with the passion of a true believer, about creating opportunities for those less fortunate with the conviction of someone who had never experienced misfortune himself. "The Vitale Foundation isn't just writing checks," he continued, his gesture encompassing the glittering crowd like a blessing bestowed upon the worthy. "We're building bridges between privilege and possibility, creating pathways for talented individuals who simply need someone to believe in their potential, because true leadership isn't about maintaining what we've inherited. It's about expanding the circle of success to include voices that have been historically silenced." The applause that followed was thunderous, enthusiastic, genuine in its appreciation for words that sounded progressive and inclusive and beautifully compassionate. But Carla, who had spent her childhood in the neighborhoods Anthony claimed to champion, recognized the subtle disconnect between his rhetoric and reality. She had seen those same neighborhoods transformed by investment that displaced families who couldn't afford the improvements, had watched opportunity programs that required connections she didn't possess. When the formal presentation ended and the floor opened for questions, most guests returned to their conversations about vacation homes and private school applications. But Carla felt something burning in her chest, her father's voice echoing across 5 years of silence, reminding her that genius deserved to be heard regardless of the economic status of its vessel. She raised her hand. The moderator's eyes swept past her twice before reluctantly acknowledging the young woman in catering uniform standing near the back of the room. A hush fell over the crowd as 500 of Chicago's most powerful people turned to stare at the girl who had dared to breach the invisible barrier between server and served. "Yes," Anthony said, his voice carrying a note of curiosity mixed with barely concealed condescension. "You have a question?" Carla stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for flight, every eye in the room weighing her words before she had spoken them. But in that moment, she channeled every lesson her father had taught her about dignity, every night she had spent studying while other teenagers slept, every rejection that had only made her more determined to prove her worth. "Mr. Vitale," he said, her voice carrying clearly across the vast space, each word enunciated with the precision of someone who had practiced perfect diction while other kids played video games. "Your foundation speaks beautifully about creating pathways for talented individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds, but I'm curious about the practical implementation of these programs." The room held its collective breath, fascinated by this unexpected entertainment, a member of the serving staff daring to engage in intellectual discourse with their golden boy. How do you ensure that community investment actually benefits existing community members rather than displacing them through gentrification? How do your opportunity programs reach young people who don't have college-educated parents to navigate application processes? And how do you measure success? By the number of individuals you help escape their circumstances, or by your ability to improve the circumstances themselves? Her question sliced through Anthony's prepared rhetoric with surgical precision, exposing the gap between philanthropic performance and actual systemic change. Several guests exchanged glances, recognizing the sophistication of an inquiry that revealed intimate knowledge of community development theory and practice. Anthony stared at her for a long moment, his perfectly composed facade flickering like a candle in wind. He had been asked many questions throughout his career, but never by someone who clearly understood the subject matter better than his prepared talking points allowed him to address. That's an excellent question, he said slowly, his voice betraying the first notes of genuine surprise she had heard from him all evening. And I think it deserves a more detailed conversation than we can have here tonight. The crowd began to murmur, sensing that something unexpected was happening, that the carefully choreographed evening had veered into unscripted territory. But Anthony's eyes never left Carla's face, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, recognition perhaps, or the dawning awareness that he was looking at someone who could match his intellect and exceed his understanding of the communities he claimed to serve. Later, after the guests had departed in their luxury cars and the ballroom had been cleared of its expensive decorations, Carla found herself sitting across from Anthony Vitale in a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the hotel. The vinyl booth was cracked with age, and the coffee tasted like liquid disappointment, but somehow the space between them crackled with an energy that neither crystal chandeliers nor marble floors could contain. "You destroyed me up there," he said, leaning forward across the scarred formica table, his tuxedo jacket draped over the back of his chair like discarded armor. "Nobody has ever asked me questions that I couldn't answer. Nobody has ever made me realize how little I actually know about the work I claim to be doing." Carla stirred sugar into her coffee with deliberate precision, studying this man who had shed his public persona like an expensive suit, revealing something vulnerable and almost human underneath. "Maybe that's because nobody who understands the real issues has ever been invited to your table before," she said quietly. "What's your name?" he asked, and there was something in his voice. Hunger, fascination, the recognition of meeting an equal in unexpected packaging. "Carla Kokesh." "Where did you go to school, Carla Kokesh?" "I graduated valedictorian from Marshall High. I deferred my Northwestern scholarship for a year to help support my mother." The words came out like a shield, protecting her from assumptions about her intelligence based on her current circumstances rather than her potential. Anthony sat back in the booth, his eyes wide with something that looked remarkably like awe. "You're 18 years old, working as a server to support your family. You turned down Northwestern to care for your mother, and you just schooled me on community development theory in front of 500 people. Who are you?" "I'm someone who's lived the life you make speeches about," she said simply. "I'm someone who understands that real change requires more than good intentions and tax-deductible donations." They talked until dawn painted the Chicago skyline in shades of possibility, their conversation ranging from urban economics to social justice theory to the practical mechanics of systemic change. With each passing hour, Anthony seemed to shed another layer of inherited privilege, revealing a mind that was genuinely curious, genuinely capable of growth, genuinely attracted to the fierce intelligence that Carla wore like armor forged in the fires of necessity. As the sun rose over a city that had tried so hard to break her spirit, Anthony reached across the table and took her hands in his touch sending electricity through her exhausted body. "I see you, Carla," he said, his voice carrying the weight of promise and possibility. "Not just your beauty, which is absolutely undeniable, but your fire, your genius, your extraordinary potential. I want to know everything about you. I want To learn from you. I want to build something together that actually matters." He paused, his thumbs tracing circles across her knuckles, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. "Marry me," he said, the words hanging in the air between them like a bridge across two different worlds. "Marry me, and I'll give you the platform to build an empire that will make both our names legendary. Together, we can change everything." In that moment, with the morning light streaming through dirty diner windows and the taste of possibility sweet on her tongue, 18-year-old Carla Kokesh believed she had found her destiny sitting across from her in a cracked vinyl booth, offering her everything she had ever dreamed of achieving. Chapter 3. The Golden Cage of Broken Promises. When Heaven Becomes Hell. At 19, 6 months into her marriage and living 40 floors above the Chicago streets that had raised her, Carla Vitale stood before panoramic windows that transformed the cityscape into abstract art. She watched tiny cars move like ants through canyons of steel and glass, while feeling increasingly like an exotic specimen trapped in a gilded terrarium. The penthouse existed in a dimension where money had evolved beyond currency into pure aesthetics. Italian marble that felt cold beneath her bare feet, furniture that belonged in museums rather than homes, and art that cost more than entire neighborhoods, while communicating nothing about the human experience she understood. 6 months into their marriage, she had learned to navigate the invisible rules that governed this rarefied atmosphere. How to smile at Anthony's business associates who looked through her as if she were expensive wallpaper. How to nod appreciatively when his mother, Victoria Vitale, offered backhanded compliments wrapped in poison and tied with silk ribbons. How to exist gracefully in spaces designed to remind her that she was a guest who could be uninvited at any moment. The morning routine had become a choreographed performance of marital bliss. Anthony would emerge from his private bathroom, because even their intimacy required separate spaces, looking like he had stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine, his custom suits pressed to perfection, his hair styled with products that cost more than Carla used to spend on groceries in a month. He would kiss her forehead with the absent affection one might show a beloved pet, murmur something about late meetings or client dinners, and disappear into his world of inherited power and unearned influence. "Don't wait up, sweetheart," had become his standard farewell, delivered with the kind of casual dismissal that made her feel like a character in someone else's story rather than the protagonist of her own life. The loneliness crept in slowly, like water seeping through invisible cracks in what had appeared to be a perfect foundation. During their courtship, Anthony had hung on her every word, fascinated by her insights into urban planning and social justice, promising that their marriage would be a true partnership where her intelligence would be valued and her ideas implemented. But somewhere between the wedding reception and their first month as husband and wife, those promises had evaporated like morning mist under the harsh light of reality. The charity events were the worst kind of torture, elaborate performances, where Carla was paraded like a trophy wife who represented Anthony's commitment to diversity and progressive values. At the Children's Hospital Gala, she had spent 20 minutes explaining her business plan to a group of potential female investors, her passion for skincare formulation igniting genuine interest in their eyes. But when Anthony approached the group, he smoothly redirected the conversation. "Ladies, I hope my wife hasn't been boring you with her little hobby projects," he said with a laugh that felt like ice water down her spine. "Carla's wonderfully creative. But let's talk about real investment opportunities. Have I mentioned our new commercial development downtown?" The women's expressions shifted from engaged interest to polite dismissal as they absorbed Anthony's message. His wife's business ideas were amusing diversions, not serious ventures worthy of their consideration. Later that evening, when Carla tried to address his public dismissal, Anthony had shrugged with casual indifference. "Sweetheart, those women control millions in investment capital. I can't have them thinking we're not serious about real business. Your skincare thing is sweet, but it's not exactly Fortune 500 material." "How wonderfully progressive of you, Anthony," Victoria Vitale had purred at their first anniversary party, her smile sharp enough to cut glass, her eyes never quite meeting Carla's as she spoke. "Bringing such cultural richness into our family. Though I do hope she understands that charity work is quite different from actual business management. We wouldn't want anyone to get confused about their proper role." Each cutting remark landed like a paper cut that stung for hours, accumulating into wounds that never quite healed before the next social gathering required her to smile and nod and pretend that being reduced to her race and background didn't slice through her dignity like a blade dipped in honey and arsenic. The business dinners were equally excruciating exercises in invisibility. Carla would sit at tables where billion-dollar deals were discussed with the casual indifference of ordering appetizers, her presence acknowledged only when someone needed to demonstrate their liberal credentials by asking her opinion on urban issues or diversity initiatives. When she attempted to contribute substantive insights about economic development or community investment strategies, her words would be met with the kind of patronizing nods reserved for children who had interrupted adult conversations with amusing observations. "Isn't she adorable?" she overheard one of Anthony's business partners whisper to another during a dinner at the Chicago club. "He's really committed to this whole social justice thing, very on brand for his generation." But the deepest betrayal came when Carla finally gathered the courage to present her business plan to Anthony. 5 years of research and 2 years of refinement condensed into a presentation that could revolutionize natural skincare for women of color. She had spent months perfecting every detail, from supply chain logistics to marketing strategies, from financial projections to social impact measurements. The folder containing her life's work felt heavy in her hands as she placed it on his mahogany desk, her heart hammering with the anticipation of finally sharing her vision with the man who had promised to help her build an empire. Anthony barely glanced at the cover page before setting it aside like junk mail. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying the kind of patronizing affection reserved for children playing dress-up. "You're absolutely adorable when you try to be serious about grown-up things, but let's be realistic here. You're my beautiful wife, not my business partner. There's tremendous honor in knowing your place and playing your role perfectly." The words hit her like a physical blow, each syllable designed to shrink her back into the box he had constructed around her identity. "But you promised," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her dreams crashing against the rocks of his indifference. "You said we would build something together. You said you saw my potential." "I did see your potential," he replied, returning his attention to documents that actually mattered to him. "Your potential to be the perfect wife for a man in my position. Beautiful, intelligent enough to hold interesting conversations, diverse enough to show my commitment to social progress. You're fulfilling that potential beautifully." Each dismissal chipped away at her soul like water eroding stone, until she began to question whether her father's voice in her memories was just the delusion of a grieving child who had created a fantasy about her own worth to survive the pain of abandonment. Perhaps Anthony was right. Perhaps she had been naive to think that intelligence and ambition could overcome the circumstances of her birth. Perhaps her proper role was to smile and nod and be grateful for the luxury that surrounded her like a beautiful prison. The penthouse became a stage where she performed the role of contented wife while dying slowly inside. She would stand at those floor-to-ceiling windows for hours, watching the city pulse with life 40 floors below, remembering the girl who had once walked those streets with fire in her belly and stars in her eyes. That girl seemed like a character from someone else's story now. A naive child who had believed that love could conquer the difference between worlds that were never meant to intersect. The worst moments came late at night, when Anthony worked in his study and she lay alone in their king-sized bed that felt as vast and cold as an Arctic landscape. She would stare at the ceiling and remember her father's words. "You're pure gold, baby girl. Rise so high you'll touch the stars." But now those words felt like cruel jokes, promises made by a dying man who had loved her too much to see the limitations that the world would impose on her dreams. She tried to fill the emptiness with activities that wives of successful men were supposed to enjoy. Personal trainers and yoga instructors, spa appointments and shopping expeditions, charity committee meetings where she was expected to plan fundraising events rather than implement actual change. But each day blended into the next in a monotonous rhythm of beautiful, meaningless existence. The breaking point came during a dinner party at their penthouse, where Anthony entertained potential investors for a real estate development project that would transform one of Chicago's historic neighborhoods into luxury condominiums. As the men discussed displacement strategies and profit margins, with the casual indifference of chess players moving pieces across a board, Carla recognized the streets they were describing, streets where families like hers had built communities from nothing, where children played in parks that would be replaced by private gardens accessible only to residents who could afford million-dollar apartments. What about the families who currently live there? She asked during a brief pause in the conversation, her voice cutting through the comfortable assumption that poor people were obstacles to be removed rather than human beings with rights and dignity. The table fell silent. 5 men in expensive suits turning to stare at the woman who had forgotten her place. Anthony's face flushed with embarrassment, his eyes sending a clear message, "Not here, not now, not ever." "Sweetheart," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "I think you might be more comfortable watching television in the bedroom while we finish our business discussion." She was dismissed like a misbehaving child, sent to her room while the adults made decisions that would destroy lives and communities she understood better than any of them ever could. As she walked through their marble hallway toward the bedroom that felt more like exile than sanctuary, Carla realized that she had traded her father's dreams for a golden cage, her potential for pretty dresses, her voice for the silence that wealthy men required from their ornamental wives. That night, lying alone in their bed while Anthony celebrated his successful pitch in the living room, 19-year-old Carla Vitale began planning her escape from paradise, understanding finally that some prisons were too beautiful to recognize until it was almost too late to remember who you were before the bars closed around your soul. Chapter 4. The Night Love Died. When Angels Fall from Grace. 1 year into their marriage, when Carla was 20 years old and felt like she had aged a decade in the gilded cage of the Vitale penthouse, the confrontation erupted like a volcano that had been building pressure beneath a deceptively calm surface for months. It began with a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, voices drifting through the partially open door of Anthony's study where he spoke with his father, Vincent Vitale, about the company's upcoming annual report and the need for strategic optics in an increasingly diverse marketplace. "The girl has been perfect for the image campaign." Vincent's gravelly voice carried the satisfaction of a chess master who had executed a particularly clever gambit. "Market research shows that having her visible in our materials has improved our approval ratings in key demographics by 12%. The photography for the annual report should really emphasize her presence, maybe something about mentorship programs or community partnerships." "She does photograph beautifully," Anthony agreed, his voice carrying the casual objectification of someone discussing an expensive piece of art rather than his wife. "The board loves that we can point to concrete evidence of our commitment to diversity It's exactly the kind of progressive positioning that sets us apart from our competitors. Carla stood frozen in the hallway, her hand pressed against her mouth to muffle the gasp that threatened to escape as the true nature of her marriage crystallized with devastating clarity. She wasn't Anthony's partner, she was his diversity. Consultant, a beautiful black woman whose face would photograph well in marketing materials designed to convince the world that the Vitale Empire cared about social justice. Just make sure she understands her role, Vincent continued, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of inherited power. We can't have her getting ideas above her station. The last thing we need is her trying to insert herself into actual business operations. Keep her focused on the charity work and photo opportunities. Don't worry, Anthony replied, and Carla could hear the smile in his voice. She's exactly where she needs to be, beautiful, grateful, and completely manageable. The words hit her. Like physical blows, each syllable designed to reduce her to nothing more than a prop in their performance of social consciousness. She stumbled back to their bedroom, her legs shaking with the weight of betrayal that felt like drowning in slow motion, her mind replaying every moment of their courtship and marriage through the lens of this devastating revelation. That night, she lay in their bed pretending to sleep while Anthony worked late, her body rigid with the kind of anger that burned cold and clean and absolutely destructive. When he finally slipped into bed beside her at 2 a.m., smelling of expensive whiskey and his father's cigar smoke, she waited until his breathing deepened into sleep before allowing herself to cry, silent tears that felt like bleeding from wounds that would never heal. The next morning brought a breakfast meeting with potential investors, another performance where Carla was expected to play her role perfectly. She sat at their dining room table, wearing a designer dress that cost more than her mother's monthly disability check, listening to men discuss profit margins and market penetration while she served artisanal coffee and Danish pastries with the kind of gracious hospitality that wealthy wives were trained to provide. "Your wife is absolutely charming," one of the investors told Anthony, speaking about Carla as if she weren't sitting 3 feet away. "Such a wonderful representation of your company's values. Very inspiring story, I'm sure." "Thank you," Anthony replied, his hand resting possessively on Carla's shoulder. "She's been an incredible asset to our community outreach initiatives." Asset. The word ricocheted through her mind like a bullet, confirming everything she had overheard the night before. She excused herself from the table with practiced grace, retreating to the kitchen where she gripped the marble countertop until her knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to scream until her throat bled. The breaking point came 3 days later during a phone call that Anthony took in his study while believing Carla was at her weekly spa appointment. She had returned early, walking through their front door just in time to hear him speaking to someone about leveraging her background for the upcoming community development project. "The authenticity factor is crucial," Anthony was saying, his voice carrying the calculated enthusiasm of a marketing executive discussing a successful campaign. "Having someone who actually grew up in these neighborhoods gives us credibility we could never buy. The optics are perfect. My wife from the South Side, now living in a penthouse, representing the American dream made possible by companies like ours. The American dream. As if her poverty had been a choice, as if her struggle had been a performance designed to enhance his credibility, as if her pain had been a commodity for him to purchase and deploy for his own benefit." Carla walked into that study like a warrior entering battle, her back straight and her voice deadly calm, despite the hurricane of rage and heartbreak swirling inside her chest. Anthony looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked suspiciously like fear as he recognized the expression on her face. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, ending the conversation while never taking his eyes off his wife. You promised me partnership, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of every humiliation she had swallowed, every dream deferred, every moment she had felt like a fraud in her own skin. You looked me in the eyes and swore you would help me build something meaningful, something that would honor my father's memory and prove that poor black girls can rise just as high as rich white boys. Anthony leaned back in his leather chair, his face settling into the kind of patronizing expression she had learned to hate with every fiber of her being. Carla, sweetheart, you're being dramatic. I've given you everything. You've given me nothing. The words exploded from her throat like years of suppressed rage finally finding their voice. You've dressed me up like a doll and paraded me around like a trophy that proves how progressive and enlightened you are. You've used my background as a marketing tool while systematically destroying every dream I ever shared with you. Are you seriously delusional enough to think that marriage to me was about business? His voice turned cold, clinical, the mask of loving husband finally slipping to reveal the entitled predator underneath. You were a charity case I rescued from the gutter, beautiful, exotic, perfect for my image. But if you think I'm going to bankrupt myself funding some fantasy about competing with real businesses, you're more naive than I thought. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence, each syllable carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Carla felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, which had been dying slowly for months, but her last vestige of hope that the man she had married had ever existed at all. A charity case, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Exotic, perfect for your image. Don't act surprised, Anthony said, standing up behind his desk with the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced consequences for his actions. You knew what this was. You were 18 years old, working as a waitress, living in poverty. I offered you a life beyond anything you could have achieved on your own. I think a little gratitude would be appropriate. The divorce papers materialized on their Italian marble countertop the next morning like a magic trick performed by the city's most expensive lawyers. Each page was a death certificate for the love she thought had been her salvation. Each clause, a reminder that marriages built on deception crumbled just as quickly as they had been constructed. No alimony, Anthony's lawyer explained during a meeting that felt like a funeral for her own dreams. No property rights, no claim to any assets acquired during the marriage. Mrs. Vitale signed a comprehensive prenuptial agreement. Carla stared at the papers, remembering the excitement she had felt 2 years ago when Anthony had presented the prenup as a formality, a legal requirement that had nothing to do with the love they shared. She had signed it without reading it carefully, trusting the man who had promised to build an empire with her rather than for himself. You'll walk away with exactly what you brought into this marriage, Anthony said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had executed a perfect con, which, if I recall correctly, was nothing. As she read the terms that would leave her exactly where she had started, no money, no property, no anything except the clothes on her back and the scars from believing that love could conquer the difference between their worlds, Carla realized that the man she had married never existed at all. He had been a carefully constructed illusion, a character designed to make her fall in love with her own destruction. 20-year-old Carla Vitale walked out of that penthouse with 2 suitcases and the crushing weight of understanding that she had traded 2 years of her life for the most expensive education in human nature ever purchased. But somewhere in the ashes of her destroyed dreams, a phoenix began to stir. Not the naive girl who had believed in fairy tales, but a woman who had learned that the only person she could trust to save her was herself. The city that had raised her welcomed her back with arms that felt like coming home after a long exile in a foreign country, where she had never learned to speak the language of conditional love and purchased affection. As she walked down streets that remembered her name, Carla began to understand that some falls from grace were actually flights toward freedom, and some endings were just the beginning of a story that had been waiting its entire life to be written. Chapter 5. Two Hearts, One Destiny. When God Tests the Warrior. 3 weeks after her 20th birthday, and 1 week after signing the divorce papers that reduced 2 years of marriage to a stack of legal documents, Carla stood in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a public health clinic bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines that pulsed with the weight of divine intervention or cosmic cruelty. The plastic test trembled in her hands like a leaf in a hurricane as the magnitude of her situation crashed over her in waves of terror and wonder. She was carrying twins, 2 innocent souls growing inside her, while she had no job, no home, no money, and no partner to share the impossible burden that suddenly felt like climbing Everest in bare feet during a blizzard. The bathroom walls seemed to close in around her as she gripped the chipped porcelain sink, her reflection in the cracked mirror, showing a woman she barely recognized, hollow-eyed, pale, wearing a discount store dress that hung on her frame like borrowed clothes from someone else's life. 3 weeks ago, she had been Mrs. Anthony Vitale, living in a penthouse that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. Now she was Carla Kokesh again, sleeping on a friend's couch and applying for jobs that wouldn't hire her because her resume showed 2 years of being a wealthy man's wife rather than developing marketable skills. The pregnancy test clattered into the trash can like a gavel delivering judgment, but the verdict remained unchanged. 2 babies, twins, growing inside a woman who could barely afford to feed herself, whose entire support system consisted of a mother lost to depression and a handful of former co-workers who could offer sympathy but not solutions. She stumbled out of the clinic and into the Chicago streets that had raised her, their familiar chaos offering a strange comfort after months of sterile perfection in the Vitale penthouse. But now even these streets felt different, charged with new meaning as she walked past playgrounds where children who looked like hers might someday play, past schools where they might learn, past corners where they might face the same struggles that had shaped her own childhood. The cramped studio apartment she could barely afford became both sanctuary and prison over the next 3 days. She had exactly $3,247 in her secret savings account, money she had hidden during her marriage by skimming small amounts from household expenses, and after calculating rent, utilities, and basic necessities, she realized this would last approximately 4 months if she lived like a monk. Carla lay on the narrow bed that doubled as her couch, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like continents she would never visit, while tears came in biblical proportions, grief for the marriage that had been built on lies, terror for the future that seemed impossible to navigate, and something else, something deeper and more primal that took her hours to recognize as protective love for the 2 lives growing inside her. On the 3rd night, when exhaustion had wrung every tear from her body and left her feeling hollow as an empty cathedral, she found herself standing before the bathroom mirror again, both hands pressed protectively over her still flat stomach where 2 hearts beat, in rhythm with her own. The woman staring back at her looked like a ghost, but somewhere in her eyes, Carla saw the flicker of something that refused to be extinguished, the same fire that had burned in her father's gaze when he spoke about her potential to touch the stars. "I will not just survive," she whispered to her reflection, her voice barely audible but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "I will rise so high that my babies will never know what it means to be hungry, to be dismissed, to be treated like they're worth less than nothing. These children will grow up knowing that their mother is a queen who built her kingdom through determination and an unbreakable spirit." The words felt like a prayer carved from desperation and hope in equal measure, a vow that seemed to transform the dingy bathroom into something sacred. As she spoke, Carla felt something shift inside her, not just the physical presence of her unborn children, but a fundamental change in her understanding of who she was and what she was capable of becoming. She remembered her father's stories, about their family's history, the generations of strong women who had survived slavery and segregation and poverty through sheer force of will. Her great-grandmother, born into bondage, but who had taught herself to read by stealing glimpses at her master's newspapers. Her grandmother, who had raised 6 children alone during the Depression, while building a small business selling homemade remedies that actually healed people when doctors wouldn't treat black patients. Her mother, before depression had stolen her light, who could solve mathematical equations that made professors weep and fix any broken machine with intuition that bordered on magic. "You come from warriors," she told her reflection, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You carry the DNA of women who turned impossible circumstances into stepping stones towards something better. These babies growing inside you aren't burdens. They're the next generation of fighters, the continuation of a legacy that refuses to be broken." Over the following weeks, as morning sickness made food taste like punishment and her body began the miraculous process of creating 2 human beings simultaneously, Carla threw herself into planning her comeback with the methodical precision of a general preparing for war. She researched every available assistance program, mapped out childcare options that wouldn't bankrupt her, and began developing the business plan that Anthony had dismissed as a naive fantasy. The skincare line had been her secret dream since high school, born from watching her mother struggle to find products that worked with their skin tone and texture, products that didn't require choosing between effectiveness and affordability. During her marriage, she had quietly researched suppliers, studied market demographics, and developed formulations using knowledge gained from years of experimentation with natural ingredients that her grandmother had taught her to blend. Now, sitting in her studio apartment with pregnancy books stacked beside business journals, legal pads covered with financial projections spread across her kitchen table like maps of territory she intended to conquer, Carla began to understand that her divorce might have been the best thing that ever happened to her. Anthony's betrayal had stripped away her illusions about love and partnership, but it had also freed her from the golden cage that had been slowly suffocating her dreams. The first prenatal appointment confirmed what she already knew. Twins, due in early spring, both healthy and growing normally despite the stress of their mother's circumstances. Dr. Martinez, a kind woman who worked at the community clinic and understood the realities of single motherhood, didn't offer false reassurances or patronizing advice. Instead, she provided practical information about nutrition on a limited budget, exercise routines that could be done in small spaces, and resources for mothers who would be raising children alone. "You're young and healthy," Dr. Martinez said. During the 12-week checkup, her voice, carrying the kind of straightforward compassion that Carla had forgotten, existed after months of navigating the artificial politeness of wealthy social circles. "Your babies are developing perfectly. The only thing you need to focus on now is taking care of yourself so you can take care of them." Taking care of herself meant acknowledging that she would need help, a lesson in humility that cut deeper than any of Anthony's cruelties. She applied for government assistance programs that required standing in lines with other women whose stories she recognized. Young mothers abandoned by partners who had promised forever, older women who had worked their entire lives only to find themselves unemployed and invisible, teenagers who had made adult decisions before they understood the consequences. But she also began building her business with the same quiet determination that had carried her through high school while working 3 jobs, using the small amount of money she had saved from her marriage, emergency funds that Anthony hadn't known about because he had never bothered to ask about her finances. She purchased basic supplies and began creating her first batch of products. In her tiny kitchen, the formulations came together like magic, oils and butters and essential ingredients combining into creams and serums that felt like silk against her skin. She tested every product on herself first, documenting reactions and adjusting ratios until each formula achieved the perfect balance of effectiveness and gentleness. When friends and neighbors began asking about the products that made her skin glow despite the stress of pregnancy and poverty, Carla knew she had created something special. By her 20th week of pregnancy, when her belly had expanded enough to require maternity clothes from thrift stores and her energy had returned, with the vengeance of a woman on a mission, she had a product line of 12 items, a business plan that could secure small business loans, and a marketing strategy that would target the demographic she understood better than any MBA-educated consultant ever could. Standing in her bathroom mirror at 5 months pregnant, watching her children move beneath her skin like dancers preparing for their grand entrance, Carla pressed both hands against her expanding belly and spoke the words that would become her daily affirmation. You are not accidents. You are not mistakes. You are not the products of a failed marriage or evidence of poor planning. You are miracles growing inside a woman who will move heaven and earth to give you everything you deserve. You are the children of a queen who is just discovering the true extent of her power. The twins seemed to respond to her voice, shifting and settling as if they recognized the sound of their mother claiming her destiny. In that moment, surrounded by the humble reality of her circumstances, but filled with the limitless possibility of her dreams, 20-year-old Carla Kokesh understood that she wasn't just carrying 2 babies. She was pregnant with her own transformation from victim to victor, from broken woman to unbreakable force of nature. Her father's voice echoed across the years with new meaning. Rise so high you'll touch the stars. But now she understood that she wouldn't be reaching for those stars alone. She would be carrying her children with her, teaching them that the view from the top was always more beautiful when you had climbed there through your own strength, your own vision, your own refusal to accept limitations that other people tried to impose on your life. The hardest part of her journey was just beginning, but for the first time since leaving Anthony's penthouse, Carla felt ready for the fight of her life. Chapter 6. Crawling Through Hell to Reach Heaven. The 8-year crucible. From age 20 to 28, 8 grueling years blurred together like frames from a movie played at triple speed, each day a masterclass in human endurance that would have broken lesser spirits, but only served to forge Carla's soul into something harder than diamonds and more brilliant than starlight. The twins, Amara and Zara, arrived on a snowy March morning that transformed pain into purpose, their first cries echoing through the charity hospital ward like battle hymns, announcing the arrival of 2 little queens who would never know poverty as their inheritance. At 20 years old, with 2 infants strapped to her chest in carriers that had seen better days but still held her precious cargo secure, Carla worked overnight cleaning shifts at restaurants while Maria, her elderly neighbor who had raised 6 children of her own, watched the twins in exchange for groceries and help with her own household tasks. This arrangement saved Carla hundreds in daycare costs, while providing the girls with a grandmother figure who spoke to them in Spanish and English, filling their world with songs and stories that would give them cultural richness their circumstances couldn't afford. Her hands cracked from industrial chemicals that ate through skin like acid. Her back screamed from hours spent on her knees, cleaning other people's messes for minimum wage and maximum humiliation. But every dollar earned was a victory against the voices that whispered she would never amount to anything more than another statistic. The other cleaning crew members, mostly women who understood struggle as a second language, became her unofficial support system, taking turns holding the babies when Carla needed both hands free, sharing formula when her milk supply couldn't keep up with feeding 2 growing children, offering words of encouragement when exhaustion threatened to claim her. Sanity. Maria, a grandmother from El Salvador who sent most of her earnings to family back home, taught Carla how to make the baby's formula stretch further by adding rice water. Denise, a single mother of 3, whose husband had abandoned her for someone, without stretch marks and student loan debt, showed her which bathroom stalls had the best lighting for doing homework during break times. Mija, Maria would say during their shared lunch breaks, spooning rice and beans from a container she had prepared at home. Your babies don't see you cleaning toilets. They see their mama working hard to give them a better life. That's love. In action, not shame. By the time Amara and Zara were walking, 2 determined little people who moved through their cramped apartment like explorers charting new territory, Carla had expanded her work to include weekend shifts at a laundromat, where she could bring the girls and let them play in the back room while she folded strangers' clothes and dreamed about the day when she would have enough money to wash her own laundry without counting quarters. The skincare business began in earnest during those laundromat shifts, when the girls napped in a playpen she had constructed from cardboard and blankets, their peaceful faces illuminated by fluorescent lights that hummed lullabies while their mother mixed oils and butters in mason jars, her hands moving with the precision of a chemist and the hope of a woman who refused to accept limitations that poverty tried to impose on her dreams. She sold her first products to the other mothers who frequented the laundromat, women who understood the struggle of looking professional on a budget, who needed skincare that worked with their complexions rather than against them, who appreciated products that cost less than a restaurant meal but delivered results that made them feel beautiful, despite circumstances that seemed designed to make them feel invisible. Carla's Glow, she had named her line, using handwritten labels that she applied while the twins slept, brown paper packaging that she decorated with drawings that Amara and Zara would scribble during their toddler years, business cards that she designed and printed at a local copy shop using birthday money her mother had managed to save despite her limited disability income. Each rejection cut deep enough to draw blood, but never deep enough to stop her relentless forward momentum. Department store buyers who wouldn't return her calls. Beauty supply shops that told her they didn't carry specialty products. Online retailers who wanted minimum orders she couldn't afford, and marketing budgets that exceeded her annual income. But for every door that slammed shut, Carla found a window to crawl through. Subway stations where she set up makeshift displays. During rush hour, selling moisturizers and serums to women who stopped to ask about the product that made her skin glow, despite working multiple jobs and raising twins alone. Hair salons in her neighborhood where the owners let her leave samples in exchange for cleaning services. Community centers where she gave presentations about entrepreneurship while Amara and Zara sat in the front row, clapping for their mama, like she was performing on Broadway. When the girls turned 3, Carla finally activated her deferred Northwestern scholarship, taking evening classes twice a week while Maria watched the twins. The business program allowed her to apply her real-world experience with Carla's Glow as case studies, turning her entrepreneurial journey into academic credit. She completed her degree in 5 years instead of 4, studying during nap time and after bedtime, writing papers that analyzed her own company's growth strategies and marketing challenges. She studied on buses between jobs, highlighted textbooks while the twins ate breakfast, wrote research papers during their afternoon naps, and somehow maintained a 4.0 GPA that no professor celebrated because they didn't know she was doing homework. By streetlight, when the electricity got shut off, the magnificent twin daughters grew from toddlers to school-age children who learned early that their mother was a warrior fighting battles they couldn't yet understand. They did homework at restaurant tables while Carla worked double shifts, colored quietly in corners of businesses where she pitched her products to skeptical owners, fell asleep in car seats while their mother drove between jobs that kept their small family afloat, But they also learned that their mother was building something extraordinary. They watched her transform their tiny kitchen into a laboratory where magic happened, witnessed her confidence grow with each successful sale, absorbed the lessons of perseverance and determination that she taught through example, rather than empty words. "Mama, why do you work so much?" 4-year-old Zara asked one evening as Carla counted the day's earnings while the girls played with toys she had bought at thrift stores and repaired with love and ingenuity. "Because I'm building us a castle, baby girl," Carla replied, pulling both daughters onto her lap despite the exhaustion that made her bones feel like lead. "A castle where you'll never have to worry about having enough food, enough clothes, enough of anything you need to become the queens I know you were born to be." "Will it have a real kitchen?" Amara asked, her small hands tracing the burn scars on Carla's forearms from accidents with industrial equipment and hot oil from restaurant work. "The biggest, most beautiful kitchen you can imagine," Carla promised, her voice carrying the absolute conviction of someone who could see the future with crystal clarity. "And a playroom bigger than this whole apartment, and your own bedrooms, with princess beds and bookshelves full of stories about little girls who changed the world." During those endless nights when exhaustion threatened to claim her sanity and poverty tried to steal her hope, Carla transformed herself into a scholar of success. She watched YouTube videos on marketing strategy while breastfeeding the twins at 3 a.m., teaching herself advanced business fundamentals while rocking crying infants back to sleep, earning her business degree through online courses paid for one credit at a time, with money scraped together from tips and overtime pay. Every textbook was a treasure she couldn't afford, but somehow managed to acquire through library sales and student exchanges. Every assignment was completed between diaper changes and bottle feedings. Every exam was taken with the twins sleeping in carriers because she couldn't afford babysitters and wouldn't leave them with anyone she didn't trust completely. By the girls' 5th birthday, when they blew out candles on a cake Carla had baked from scratch because store-bought celebrations weren't in their budget, Carla's glow was generating real revenue. The small skincare line had grown from 12 products to 30, from mason jar packaging to professional containers, from handwritten labels to printed materials that looked like they belonged in luxury boutiques. The warehouse space she rented was barely larger than a storage unit, but it represented the first step toward the empire she was building, one product at a time. She hired her first employee, Rosa, a former single mother who understood the struggle and shared Carla's vision of building something beautiful from nothing. And together they filled orders that arrived through a website Carla had taught herself to build during late-night computer lab sessions at the community college. By the twins' 7th birthday, the warehouse had expanded twice. The employee roster had grown to include 15 people, mostly women who had faced their own struggles and found hope in Carla's example, and Carla's glow was being featured in beauty magazines that had once ignored her existence, written about by bloggers who praised the quality and affordability of products created by someone who understood their audience better than any focus group ever could. The morning of Amara and Zara's 8th birthday dawned with the kind of promise that made Chicago's skyline look like a crown jewel displayed against velvet clouds. 28-year-old Carla Kokesh stood in the shower of her 2-bedroom apartment, not yet the penthouse she dreamed of, but a home where her daughters had their own rooms and never went to bed hungry, and let hot water wash away 8 years of struggle that had transformed a broken girl into an unbreakable woman. Today would mark the official launch of her expanded product line, the signing of her first major retail partnership, and the beginning of a new chapter where Carla's glow would move from surviving to thriving, from small business to empire, from the dream of a desperate 20-year-old to the reality of a woman who had touched the stars her father had promised she could reach. As she dressed for the day that would change everything, Carla looked at herself in the mirror and saw not the victim of Anthony Vitale's cruelty, but the victor who had turned betrayal into fuel, poverty into purpose, and single motherhood into the foundation of a dynasty that would secure her daughters' futures for generations to come. The girl who had once cleaned toilets while her babies slept against her chest was about to become the CEO of her own destiny, and nothing in heaven or earth could stop her now. Chapter 7. The Empire Strikes Back. When queens claim their throne, on the morning of Amara and Zara's 8th birthday, 28-year-old Carla Kokesh stood as the CEO of a thriving cosmetics company called Carla's Glow that had grown from mason jars mixed in a laundromat to a successful enterprise with 23 employees, one modern warehouse facility, and a strong online presence that generated mid-six figures annually. The woman who once cleaned toilets while her babies slept against her chest now walked through her warehouse headquarters in professional suits that fit properly for the first time in her life, her voice commanding respect in meetings where business partners and distributors valued her expertise and authenticity. The woman who once cleaned toilets while her babies slept against her chest now walked through her downtown corporate headquarters in bespoke suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her voice commanding absolute respect in boardroom meetings where venture capitalists fought for the privilege of investing in her vision. The transformation was complete and total, not just of her circumstances, but of her very essence. The broken 20-year-old who had left Anthony's penthouse, with nothing but dignity and determination, had been forged in 8 years of fire into something magnificent and unstoppable. Every morning when she looked in the mirror of her corner office bathroom, yes, she had her own bathroom now, with marble countertops and gold fixtures and towels that cost more than she used to spend on groceries. Carla saw her father's prophecy, fulfilled in the confident gaze of a woman who had indeed touched the stars. The corporate headquarters occupied 2 floors of a renovated warehouse in a trendy arts district, each level buzzing with the kind of purposeful energy that came from people who believed they were changing the world one product at a time. The ground floor housed the research and development lab, where Carla worked alongside 2 part-time chemists to create formulations that revolutionized skincare for women of color. The second floor contained the offices, shipping area, and customer service department, where young professionals crafted campaigns that spoke directly to the experiences of women who had been ignored by the beauty industry for decades. But today, this space had been transformed into something that looked like a fairy tale come to life. The main floor was decorated for Amara and Zara's 8th birthday celebration. Balloons in every color of the rainbow, creating an indoor garden of joy, streamers that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through skylights, and a cake shaped like a castle that stood 2 feet tall in the center of the conference area that had been converted into a party space. "Mama, this is the most beautiful castle in the whole world," 8-year-old Amara declared as she spun in circles, her birthday dress, a custom creation that made her look like the princess she had always been, flowing around her like liquid sunshine. "It's better than Disneyland," Zara added, her identical twin energy channeled into examining every detail of the decorations with the kind of analytical precision she had inherited from her mother. "Can we have our sleepover party up here too?" Carla knelt down to her daughter's eye level, these 2 magnificent beings who had been her motivation through every impossible day, her reason for refusing to surrender when surrender would have been so much easier than continuing to fight. At 8 years old, they were already showing signs of the intelligence and determination that ran in their bloodline like precious metal in a vein of ore waiting to be mined. "You can have anything you want, baby girls," she said, pulling them both into a hug that felt like coming home after a journey that had lasted lifetimes. "This is your castle too. Everything Mama has built belongs to you, because you were the reason I learned how to build it." The employees who filled the party space weren't just workers. They were family, bound together by shared vision and mutual respect in ways that traditional corporate structures could never achieve. Rosa, who had been Carla's first hire and was now the vice president of operations, had tears in her eyes as she watched the twins blow out candles on their castle cake. Marcus, the head of marketing who had left a prestigious job at a Fortune 500 company to join Carla's revolution, led the singing of Happy Birthday with the enthusiasm of an uncle celebrating his favorite nieces. Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief chemist, who had helped develop their breakthrough anti-aging serum, presented the girls with custom lab coats embroidered with their names and the title Future CEO. These people genuinely loved Amara and Zara because their mother had created a culture where family came first and dreams were not just encouraged but expected to come true. Carla had learned from Anthony's mistakes. She would never be the kind of leader who treated her employees as disposable assets. Instead, she had built an organization where single mothers could bring their children to work when daycare fell through, where employees received equity stakes that made them partners rather than servants, where success was measured not just in profits, but in the positive impact they created in their community. Miss Carla, her 5-year-old Destiny, the daughter of one of the warehouse supervisors, tugged on Carla's skirt with the kind of bold confidence that came from growing up in an environment where children were valued and heard. "When I grow up, can I work for you too?" "Honey," Carla said, lifting the little girl up so they were face to face, "when you grow up, you're going to be so smart and so capable that you might end up being my boss, and I'll be proud to work for you." The party continued late into the afternoon, with games and presents and the kind of pure joy that money couldn't buy, but financial security could certainly provide. Watching her daughters open gifts that ranged from educational toys to savings bonds that would help fund their college educations, Carla felt the weight of accomplishment settle around her shoulders like a mantle passed down from generations of strong women who had dreamed of this moment without ever believing they would live to see it. As the sun began to set over Chicago's skyline, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched the empire Carla had built from nothing, she stood at the massive windows overlooking the city that had once seemed determined to crush her spirit. The view from the top was everything her father had promised it would be: vast, beautiful, and filled with possibilities that stretched to every horizon. Below her, the streets where she had once walked in poverty pulsed with life and energy, but they no longer felt like places where dreams went to die. Instead, they looked like launching pads for the next generation of dreamers who would see what she had accomplished and understand that rise was always possible for those willing to work for it, fight for it, and refuse to accept limitations that other people tried to impose on their lives. "Mama," Zara said, appearing at her side with the quiet thoughtfulness that made her seem older than her 8 years. "Are you happy?" The question caught Carla off guard, not because she didn't know the answer, but because happiness seemed like too small a word for what she felt. Joy, satisfaction, pride, triumph, gratitude, all of these emotions swirled together into something that felt like flying without leaving the ground. "I'm more than happy, baby girl," she said, wrapping her arm around her daughter and pulling her close. "I'm free. I'm exactly who I was always meant to be, living the life I was always meant to live, with the 2 people I love most in the world." "Are we rich now?" Amara asked, joining them at the window with the kind of direct question that 8-year-olds specialized in asking. Carla considered the question carefully, remembering her own childhood confusion about the difference between having money and being wealthy, between financial success and true security. "We have enough money to take care of ourselves and help other people," she said finally. "But more importantly, we're rich in love, rich in possibilities, rich in the knowledge that we can accomplish anything we set our minds to achieving. The twins nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness of children who had inherited their mother's intelligence along with her determination. They had grown up watching her build an empire from scratch, had seen her transform from someone who counted pennies to someone who signed seven-figure contracts, had witnessed the daily miracle of dreams becoming reality through sheer force of will, combined with unshakable faith. As the party wound down and employees began to head home to their own families, Carla found herself alone in her office with Amara and Zara, the three of them surrounded by the remnants of celebration and the quiet satisfaction of a day perfectly executed. The castle cake sat on her conference table like an edible monument to everything they had achieved together, its sugar towers catching the last rays of sunlight and transforming them into something that looked like magic made manifest. "Tell us the story again, Mama," Amara requested, curling up in one of the leather chairs that cost more than Carla used to make in 6 months. "Tell us about when we were babies and you were building our castle." It had become their favorite. Bedtime story, not a fairy tale about princesses waiting to be rescued, but a true story about a queen who had rescued herself and her daughters through intelligence, determination, and the kind of love that could move mountains when properly applied. Carla settled into her chair behind the massive mahogany desk that had once belonged to a railroad baron, her daughters flanking her like small generals planning their next campaign. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had told this story hundreds of times but never tired of its message. "There was a young woman who lost everything she thought she needed to be happy. But what she discovered was that losing everything false made room for her to build something true, something lasting, something that would belong to her daughters and their daughters for generations to come." As she spoke, Carla looked around her office, at the awards lining the walls, at the family photos that showed their journey from poverty to prosperity, at the vision board where she continued to map out dreams that had grown even bigger now that she knew absolutely anything was possible, and understood that she had become the queen her father always knew she was destined to be. The girl who had once promised her dying father that she would touch the stars, had done something even more extraordinary. She had become a star herself, burning bright enough to light the way for everyone who followed in her footsteps. Chapter 8. When Ghosts knock at heaven's door, the reckoning arrives. The conference room door opened during the height of the birthday celebration, like a portal between worlds, and through it stepped a man who bore only a passing resemblance to the confident prince who had once promised Carla the universe while sitting in a 24-hour diner 8 years ago. 36-year-old Anthony Vitale looked like death warmed over, thinner than hunger itself, paler than regret, his once immaculate confidence replaced by the desperate hollowness of someone who had gambled everything and lost it all through. A combination of arrogance, bad decisions, and the kind of spectacular self-destruction that only entitled men seem capable of achieving. He wore the navy blue uniform of the building's custodial service, the polyester fabric hanging on his diminished frame like borrowed clothes from someone else's life. The man who had once commanded boardrooms filled with Chicago's elite now pushed a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. His hands, those same hands that had once caressed Carla's face while making promises about empires they would build together, now wearing rubber gloves stained with the reality of honest work. Anthony had applied for this position 3 days ago, driven by desperation and the bitter irony of circumstances that had reduced him to seeking employment wherever doors might still open for someone with his tarnished reputation. The charges, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to defraud investors had been dismissed on technicalities that his father's expensive lawyers had purchased with the last remnants of the Vitale fortune. But the damage to his name and prospects had been absolute and irreversible. The gambling addiction had consumed what little remained of his inheritance after the legal fees. Atlantic City, Las Vegas, underground poker games in Chicago, warehouses where desperate men bet cars and houses, and futures on cards that never fell in their favor. He had convinced himself that one big win would restore everything he had lost, that luck owed him compensation for the injustices he had suffered, that the universe would eventually correct the cosmic mistake that had brought him so low. But the universe, as it turned out, had a different kind of justice in mind. He had lost the penthouse first, then the cars, then the remaining stocks and bonds that had represented his claim to the Vitale legacy. His mother, Victoria, had cut off contact after he had forged her signature on documents that nearly cost her the family's remaining assets. His father had died of a heart attack brought on by the stress of watching his son destroy everything the family had built over 3 generations. Anthony Vitale, once heir to an empire, now existed in a studio apartment in a neighborhood he had once driven through without stopping, surviving on ramen noodles and the kind of minimum wage work he had never imagined himself capable of performing. Anthony had applied for this position through a temp agency 3 days ago, using only his first name and middle initial on the application, A. Vincent Vitale, rather than Anthony Vitale, a small deception that had become habit since his legal troubles, made his full name recognizable in Chicago business circles. The building management company that hired custodial services had no reason to cross-reference their cleaning staff with former executives, and the assignment had come through as routine commercial cleaning for CG Enterprises, the holding company name that wouldn't have triggered any recognition of Carla's maiden name or her cosmetics brand. He'd simply needed work that would pay rent and provide health insurance, employment that wouldn't require references from people who had long since written him off as a cautionary tale about privilege without purpose. But now, standing in the doorway of a conference room that looked like a fairy tale made manifest, Anthony froze as he saw her, this radiant goddess in designer white who bore only a passing resemblance to the broken girl he had discarded like garbage 8 years ago. 28-year-old Carla Kokesh commanded the space with the kind of natural authority that couldn't be purchased or inherited, her presence filling the room like sunlight that made everything else fade into background shadows. She wore success, like a crown that had been earned rather than inherited, her custom suit tailored to fit a body that had been strengthened by years of carrying impossible burdens and emerging victorious. Her skin glowed with the kind of health and prosperity that came from eating well, sleeping soundly, and living without the constant anxiety that poverty imposed on every decision. Her hair was styled by professionals who charged more per appointment than Anthony now made in a month, and her jewelry, simple, elegant pieces that whispered rather than shouted their value, caught the light like promises kept to herself and her family. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart completely. Gone was the desperate hope he remembered from their marriage, the eager-to-please vulnerability that had made her so easy to manipulate and dismiss. Instead, he saw the steady confidence of someone who had fought every battle life could throw at her and emerged undefeated, unbowed, and absolutely certain of her own worth. Behind her, 2 absolutely stunning 8-year-old girls with identical curls and intelligent brown eyes paused their laughter to study this stranger with the kind of intuitive wariness that children possessed when they sensed danger in human form. They flanked their mother like small guards protecting their queen, their posture unconsciously defensive despite the festive atmosphere that surrounded them. Anthony's breath caught in his throat as he studied their faces and saw his own features reflected back at him. The shape of their noses, the curve of their chins, the particular shade of brown in their eyes that came from his Italian heritage mixed with Carla's African lineage. These were his daughters, the children he had abandoned before they were born, the family he had thrown away in his arrogance and stupidity. They were beautiful beyond description, clearly intelligent, obviously loved and cherished in ways that made them glow with the kind of confidence that came from growing up secure in their mother's devotion. They wore matching birthday dresses that probably cost more than his weekly salary, their hair adorned with ribbons that caught the light, like spun gold, their faces bright with the joy of children who had never known want or neglect or the crushing weight of parental disappointment. "Carla," he breathed, her name escaping his lips like a prayer from a man who had forgotten how to believe in God, like a confession torn from the depths of a soul that had been hollowed out by years of self-inflicted damage and consequences that had arrived with interest, compounded by his own stubbornness. She turned slowly, deliberately, her expression shifting from surprise to something infinitely more powerful than anger. The absolute serenity of someone who had transcended the need for validation from the person who had once tried to destroy her soul. When their eyes met across the conference room that had been transformed into a birthday paradise, the silence that fell was not awkward or tense, but profound in its completeness. This was the moment 8 years in the making, the confrontation between the woman who had risen from ashes and the man who had burned himself to the ground, the meeting of destinies that had diverged so completely that they might as well have existed in parallel universes until this moment brought them back into the same space and time. The employees and children in the room seemed to sense the shift in energy, conversations falling away like leaves in autumn wind as everyone turned to watch this unexpected drama unfold. But for Carla and Anthony, the room had emptied of everyone, except the 3 people who mattered most: a mother, her daughters, and the ghost of a marriage that had died so thoroughly that its resurrection seemed impossible. "Hello, Anthony," Carla said finally, her voice carrying the kind of calm control that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was worth. "I see you found your way back to where you belong." The words hung in the air between them like a verdict delivered by a judge who had considered all the evidence and found the defendant guilty of every charge that mattered. Anthony looked down at his custodial uniform, then back at the empire that surrounded him, understanding with devastating clarity that he was witnessing the complete reversal of everything he had once believed about power, worth, and destiny. He had fallen from grace while she had risen to glory, and the distance between them now was measured not in feet or years, but in the fundamental difference between someone who had earned their success and someone who had inherited it only to squander it through pride and stupidity. "I need to finish my work," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the weight of everything he couldn't say, everything he had lost, everything he could never repair or restore or reclaim. As he backed out of the conference room like a servant retreating from royalty, Anthony understood that he wasn't just witnessing Carla's triumph, he was confronting the evidence of his own moral bankruptcy. The proof that she had always been worth more than he had ever been capable of recognizing. Chapter 9. The King Kneels Before the Queen. When pride falls and truth rises, Anthony's entire universe imploded as he stood outside the conference room, his cleaning cart forgotten like debris from a shipwreck, while the full magnitude of his catastrophic stupidity crashed over him in waves that threatened to drown him in the depths of his own regret. The empire surrounding him, the success radiating from every corner of this building like warmth from a fire he had extinguished with his own hands, the respect evident in every employee's posture as they spoke about their CEO with genuine affection, the love flowing between Carla and the daughters he had abandoned before they were born, belonged to the woman he had once called worthless, and his knees buckled under the crushing weight of understanding what he had thrown away. He stumbled to a supply closet on the floor below, closing the door behind him before collapsing against shelves stocked with cleaning chemicals that couldn't scrub away the stains on his soul. In the darkness that smelled of industrial disinfectant and his own desperation, 34-year-old Anthony Vitale wept like a child who had broken something precious and irreplaceable, his body shaking with sobs that contained 8 years of accumulated grief for the life he could have lived if he hadn't been too proud and too blind to see the treasure standing right in front of him. The tears came in biblical proportions. For the marriage he had destroyed through arrogance, for the children whose first steps he had missed and whose first words he had never heard, for the woman who had loved him enough to believe in his lies about partnership and equality. But most of all, he cried for the man he had been at 26, so confident in his inherited superiority that he had convinced himself that Carla's intelligence was cute rather than exceptional, her potential amusing rather than extraordinary, her love dispensable rather than the most precious gift he would ever receive. I was wrong, he gasped to the empty closet, the words torn from his throat like a confession before the altar of his own damnation. I was blind and arrogant and cruel beyond measure. I didn't see her worth, her brilliance, her absolutely extraordinary strength. I threw away the most precious thing in my life because I was too proud and too stupid to recognize the treasure standing right in front of me. The memories assaulted him with surgical precision. Every dismissive comment he had made about her, business plans, every time he had introduced her as his beautiful wife rather than his partner, every charity gala where he had paraded her like a trophy that demonstrated his progressive values while systematically destroying her dreams behind closed doors. He remembered the look in her eyes during their final confrontation, the way her love had died in real time as she realized that the man she had married was nothing more than an elaborate illusion constructed to manipulate her into a life of beautiful servitude. When his tears were finally exhausted, Anthony forced himself to return to work, pushing his cleaning cart through hallways that felt like museum corridors, displaying the artifacts of his own failure. Every framed magazine article featuring Carla's success was a dagger to his chest. Every employee who spoke about their CEO with genuine admiration was a reminder of the loyalty he had never earned and never deserved. Every photograph of Carla's glow products was evidence of the empire she had built from the dreams he had dismissed as naive fantasies. He cleaned offices where venture capitalists had fought for the privilege of investing in her vision. He emptied trash cans that contained the remnants of strategy sessions worth more than his annual salary. He mopped floors where she had walked in designer shoes that cost more than his monthly rent, commanding respect that had been earned through intelligence, determination, and the kind of authentic leadership he had never possessed despite inheriting every advantage. The worst part was seeing the evidence of what kind of mother she had become. The twins' artwork decorated the walls of her private office like priceless masterpieces, each crayon drawing and construction paper creation displayed with the kind of pride that made it clear these children were the center of her universe. Their school photos showed gap-toothed smiles and intelligent eyes that sparkled with the confidence of children who had never doubted their own worth because their mother had never let them. "Mama built us a castle," he heard one of them saying to an employee during his 3rd week of working in the building, and the words hit him like a physical blow because he understood that the castle wasn't just metaphorical. It was this empire, this legacy, this proof that love could indeed move mountains when it was combined with unwavering determination and absolute faith in one's own capabilities. The breaking point came on a Friday evening when most of the staff had gone home for the weekend, leaving Anthony alone with his shame and his cleaning cart in the building that housed everything he had lost. He was emptying wastebaskets in Carla's office when he noticed the family photos on her desk, professional portraits that showed a mother and daughters who looked like they had stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine, their happiness so genuine and complete that it made his chest ache with the weight of what could have been. Behind him, a soft voice said, "They're beautiful, aren't they?" He turned to find Carla standing in the doorway, still wearing the elegant white suit from earlier, but with her shoes in her hand, looking like a queen who had paused in her royal duties to check on her kingdom. She seemed both larger and smaller than he remembered, more powerful in her presence, but somehow more human in her vulnerability as she looked at the photographs of her daughters with the kind of love that could stop wars and start revolutions. "They are," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his heart breaking all over again. "They're the most beautiful children I've ever seen." "They're brilliant too," Carla said, moving into the office with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin and her own space. "Amara wants to be a scientist, like Dr. Chen. Zara thinks she might become a lawyer so she can fight for people who don't have anyone else to fight for them. They both read at a college level and speak 3 languages fluently." Each detail was a knife to Anthony's soul, reminding him of the conversations he had never had, the bedtime stories he had never read, the homework he had never helped with. These children had grown up knowing they could become anything they wanted because their mother had shown them that limitations were illusions that other people tried to impose on exceptional souls. "Carla," he said, her name feeling foreign on his tongue after 8 years of trying to forget the sound of it. "I need you to know—" "I don't need you to know anything," she interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of gentle firmness that brooked no argument. "I don't need your apologies, your explanations, or your regrets. I needed those things 8 years ago when they might have mattered. What I need now is for you to understand that this conversation is a courtesy, not an invitation to re-enter our lives." She moved to her desk and picked up one of the family photos, studying it with the kind of maternal pride that had been foreign to him until this moment. "Do you know what I told them about their father?" she asked, not looking at him as she spoke. Anthony's throat closed completely, unable to form words around the weight of anticipation and dread. "I told them he was someone who wasn't ready to be a parent when they were born, someone who had his own journey to take before he could understand what it meant to love someone more than himself. I told them that sometimes people have to lose everything to find out who they really are, and that maybe someday he would become the man they deserved to have as a father." The words hit him like absolution, and condemnation rolled into one devastating package. She had protected them from his failures, while leaving the door open for his redemption, had shielded them from his cruelty, while maintaining hope for his eventual growth into something worthy of their consideration. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the whisper of climate-controlled air and distant traffic 40 floors below. "Because what I did to you was unforgivable. I destroyed the most beautiful love story ever written, abandoned the most precious family ever created, and threw away a chance at happiness that most men only dream about experiencing." He took a deep breath, forcing himself to continue despite the fact that every word felt like swallowing broken glass. "But I need you to know that every morning I wake up knowing I'm the villain in my daughter's origin story, the man who hurt their mother so badly that she had to rebuild herself from scratch just to survive. I need you to know that I understand. I don't deserve their forgiveness, your forgiveness, or even the chance to explain how thoroughly I hate the man I used to be." Carla set the photograph back on her desk and finally looked at him directly, her eyes holding his with the kind of steady gaze that could see straight through to his soul. "And what about the man you are now, Anthony? Have you figured out who that person is supposed to be?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge he wasn't sure he was strong enough to cross. Who was he now? Not the arrogant prince who had inherited an empire and squandered it through pride and stupidity. Not the gambling addict who had convinced himself that luck owed him compensation for his self-inflicted wounds. Not the broken man who had applied for a custodial job without knowing he would be cleaning the offices of the woman whose heart he had shattered. "I'm someone who finally understands that worth has to be earned," he said slowly, each word carefully chosen and absolutely true. "I'm someone who has learned that honest work performed with dignity is worth more than any inheritance, that humility is the foundation of wisdom, and that the greatest privilege in life is having people who love you enough to help you become better than you are." "And what do you want from us, Anthony? What do you want from this conversation?" The question he had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. What did he want? To reclaim the family he had destroyed, to undo 8 years of consequences that had taught him lessons he should have learned decades ago, to somehow convince the woman who had built an empire from his ashes that he deserved another chance to disappoint her. "I want to earn the right to be their father," he said, the words coming from a place so deep inside him that he hadn't known it existed until this moment. "Not because I contributed DNA, but because I've become someone worthy of their love, their respect, their time. I want to prove that the man who abandoned them is dead, and the man who would die for them is finally ready to live up to the title of father." Carla studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable as she weighed his words against 8 years of evidence that he was capable of extraordinary selfishness and spectacular self-destruction. Finally, she nodded once, a small gesture that somehow felt like the beginning of something neither forgiveness nor condemnation, but possibility tempered by wisdom earned through suffering. "Then prove it," she said simply, "not with words, but with actions. Not with grand gestures, but with consistent daily choices that demonstrate you've actually changed rather than simply learned to say the right things when your back is against the wall." As she walked past him toward the door, she paused and spoke without turning around. "They deserve a father who chooses them every day, Anthony. Not someone who wants them when it's convenient or profitable or emotionally satisfying. They deserve someone who understands that being a parent means putting their needs before your own wants, their security before your pride, their happiness before your redemption." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like both ending and beginning, leaving Anthony alone in the office that contained everything he had lost and everything he might possibly still have the chance to earn back, one honest day at a time. Chapter 10. The Choice Between Justice and Grace, where love and mercy meet their match. 8 months passed like seasons changing in the book of Carla's new life, each day bringing fresh evidence that 36-year-old Anthony Vitale was attempting the most difficult transformation any human being could undertake, the metamorphosis from destroyer to protector, from taker to giver, from the man who had shattered a family to someone who might someday deserve to be part of one. He worked the night custodial shift she had offered him, cleaning the same offices where she built her empire during the day, his presence becoming a haunting reminder of who he used to be versus who he was desperately trying to become. The transformation was visible in ways both subtle and profound. Gone was the entitled swagger that had once characterized his movement through spaces he believed belonged to him by birthright. Instead, Anthony moved through the building with the careful precision of someone who understood that his presence was a privilege that could be revoked at any moment. His uniform was always pristine, pressed with care in the small studio apartment, where he had learned to find dignity in simple tasks. The flowers arrived every morning without fail, not expensive arrangements designed to purchase forgiveness, but simple bouquets of daisies and sunflowers from corner markets. Each came with handwritten notes that never asked for anything but expressed gratitude for the opportunity to breathe the same air as the children he had abandoned. Carla donated every arrangement to local hospitals. Understanding the gesture was about consistency rather than romance. The letters of apology accumulated unopened in a drawer marked "Ghosts of the Past," their handwriting evolving from desperate scrawl to measured script as months progressed. Dr. Sarah Martinez, Carla's therapist, had helped establish this boundary. His healing process is his responsibility, not your burden. The charitable donations Anthony made in the company's name went to causes her father would have supported: business education for single mothers, scholarships for low-income children, food security initiatives. Always anonymous, always representing significant sacrifice from someone earning minimum wage. Carla allowed these contributions because they benefited people who needed help, not because she felt obligated to acknowledge his redemption attempts. But it was the work itself that provided the most honest measure of his transformation. Anthony performed his custodial duties with humility that would have been unimaginable 8 years ago, arriving early, completing every task with meticulous care, learning the names of employees who worked late hours, and remembering details about their families. "That man has changed," Rosa told Carla one evening as they reviewed quarterly reports. "I've been waiting for the mask to slip, for the entitled prince to show through the janitor uniform, but I think he might actually be becoming the person he's pretending to be." Marcus, the head of marketing, had shared similar observations. "He stays late when there are big projects, makes sure presentation rooms are perfect for morning meetings. Yesterday I saw him polishing the conference table at 3 a.m. because someone had spilled coffee. That's not performative. That's someone who takes pride in supporting other people's success." Even Dr. Chen, the chief chemist, grudgingly admitted that Anthony's cleaning of the research facilities exceeded professional standards. "He's learned proper handling procedures, improved our lab safety protocols. That takes intellectual curiosity and genuine concern for other people's work." The real test came on a snowy December evening when Carla worked late, while 8-year-old Amara and Zara slept in the on-site childcare center. After 8 months of watching Anthony from a distance, she needed to see who he became when he thought. No one was watching. She found him in the lobby at 2 a.m. mopping floors that already gleamed under soft lighting. Anthony looked up when he heard her footsteps, his expression shifting from surprise to hope tempered by resignation. The look of someone who had learned not to expect anything, but remained grateful for small mercies. He was thinner than during their marriage, but healthier somehow, as if honest work had burned away the softness that inherited wealth had created. "Don't let me interrupt your work," she said, settling into one of the leather chairs while pulling out her tablet. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, he cleaning with methodical precision, she planning the future of an empire that employed 23 people and generated mid-6 figures annually. "Carla," he said finally, his voice barely audible, "I need you to know something." She looked up, her expression neutral but attentive. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued, wringing out his mop, "because what I did was unforgivable. I destroyed the most beautiful love story ever written, abandoned the most precious family ever created, and threw away a chance at happiness that most men only dream about." He paused, gathering courage. "But I need you to know that every morning I wake up knowing I'm the villain in my daughter's origin story, the man who hurt their mother so badly that she had to rebuild herself from scratch. I understand I don't deserve their forgiveness or even the chance to explain how completely I despise the man I used to be." As he spoke, Carla saw their reflection in the panoramic windows, the triumphant 28-year-old queen who had risen from ashes, and the fallen 36-year-old king who had burned himself to the ground through arrogance and pride. But I need to tell you about the man I've become, he continued, his voice growing stronger, because I hope, that he might be someone worthy of being their father, not because of DNA or legal rights, but because I've finally learned what it means to love someone more than yourself, to choose service over entitlement. He set down his mop and faced her directly. I've spent 8 months learning who I am without inherited power and unearned privilege. I've discovered that I take pride in making spaces beautiful for other people, that I sleep better when I've earned my pay through honest work. I've learned that happiness comes from giving rather than taking, from being useful rather than ornamental. Carla closed her tablet. Understanding this moment had been 8 months in the making. I've learned to pray again, he said. Not for forgiveness, but for the wisdom to become the father they deserve, the strength to choose their happiness over my own desires, and the grace to accept whatever role you decide I'm worthy of playing. In their lives, the silence that followed felt pregnant with possibility and consequence. Carla studied this man who had been broken down to his essential elements and rebuilt from components that included humility, service, and hard-earned wisdom. The girls ask about you sometimes, she said finally. They've seen you around the building. They're curious about the man who works so hard to keep their mama's company clean and beautiful. Anthony's breath caught, understanding this was either the beginning of hope or a final goodbye. What do you tell them? He asked. I tell them that some people have to lose everything to find out who they really are. I tell them that becoming a parent isn't about biology. It's about choosing someone else's well-being over your own convenience. Every single day for the rest of your life. She stood and walked to the windows. I tell them that their father is someone who wasn't ready to love them when they were born, but who might be learning how to love them now. I tell them that love is a choice that has to be made over and over again, especially when it requires becoming better than you've ever been before. She turned back to face him, and in her eyes he saw not the desperate girl he had manipulated, but the queen she had become, powerful enough to grant mercy, wise enough to demand proof, strong enough to protect her children while remaining open to the possibility that people could change. Do you know what the hardest part of being a parent is, Anthony? He shook his head. The hardest part is accepting that your children's happiness matters more than your own redemption, that their security is more important than your forgiveness, that their future is more valuable than your past. Are you prepared to love them? That much. Are you ready to choose them over yourself, even if it means earning their trust one day at a time for the rest of your life? Yes, he said, the word emerging from depths of his soul. I'm ready to love them that much. I'm ready to earn the right to be their father, one day at a time, for as long as it takes. Carla nodded once, a small gesture that felt like sunrise after the longest night. Then we'll start slowly, she said. Saturday mornings, supervised, visits. You'll read to them, help with homework, listen to their dreams. You'll show them what it looks like when someone chooses service over selfishness, when someone finds dignity in honest work, when someone loves them enough to become better than they used to be. She moved toward the elevators, pausing to look back. But understand this, they already have everything they need to become extraordinary women. You're not joining their story to save them. You're asking for the privilege of watching them save themselves while supporting their dreams in whatever way they'll allow. As the elevator doors closed, Anthony was left alone in the lobby, understanding that he had been given something more precious than forgiveness, the chance to earn the right to love his daughters, to prove that redemption was possible for those willing to do the work transformation required. The choice between justice and grace had been made, not in favor of one over the other, but in recognition that love was both the strictest judge and the most merciful redeemer. Carla Kokesh had become exactly what her father always knew she could be, a woman powerful enough to grant second chances, wise enough to protect her children, and generous enough to believe that even the most spectacular failures could be transformed into stories of hope for anyone brave enough to do the work that redemption required, one honest day at a time. The ultimate question for our hearts and souls. Should 28-year-old Carla open her heart to the possibility of redemption and allow 36-year-old Anthony to slowly, painfully earn his way back into their 8-year-old daughter's lives? Or should she protect the sanctuary she's built from the man who once burned it to the ground? Can love truly conquer the deepest betrayals, or are some wounds too sacred to forgive? Is redemption possible for someone who chose cruelty over kindness when it mattered most, or do some sins stain the soul permanently?